Hi, everyone. Welcome back to our podcast. This is the third episode, and today we will be discussing the personnel of schools in these counties and how this aspect relates to the funding disparity of Maryland counties. And I'm rejoined by my co-hosts, Sean, Jenna, and Ryan.
Hello.
And to start with, I think we can look at a few statistics that I found. And all of this information about the individual schools were from the National Center for Education Statistics, which looked at the years 2020 to 2021. So real quick, I'm just gonna throw some numbers at you and hopefully they make sense. So for Kent County, um, Kent County has 1,812 students with a student teacher ratio of 10.98, so about 11 students to one teacher. And then Charles County has 26,768 students with a student teacher ratio of 14.45. And Prince George's County has 131,646 students with a student teacher ratio of 14.05. So hopefully all those numbers, through all those numbers, you were able to see that the number of students are drastically different within these counties, while the student teacher ratios were relatively in the same ballpark, although Kent's ratio was definitely closer than the other two counties. So as we go to talk more about this topic, we'll obviously look into the amount of funding relating to the number of students, since you're not going to give the same amount of money for a county with a ton of students versus a small amount, which we touched on in Jenna's podcast. But for now, I want to focus on simply the number of students. And I wanted to ask, do you think the number of students in a county affects the amount of attention that the county board gives to them and therefore affects the funding aspect?
I can start. I think yes. I don't know. It would affect how the county perceives it. It depends on how well the county is with I guess understanding how many students they have because I feel like they might get into a situation where it just turns into numbers rather than actual children, So it's hard to understand the grasp of for example, PG County with the 131 ish thousand students. That's such a large number, and I think it would be hard to visualize how many kids that actually is. And I think that might cause problems with funding, not actually realizing how much funding is needed to be put into each facility or each given to bring in enough teachers to have for each kid. So I think that yes, funding can definitely be different depending on how many kids are there, and I think that having a larger number of kids makes it hard to actually actually delegate funding in a good way so that every single kid is getting the same opportunities as another kid.
Yeah, that's an interesting perspective. Does anyone else have any thoughts?
I mean, I don't want to repeat what Jenna said, but I mean, having more students overall is going to make them, I guess, I don't know, a larger player in the education community. Like that, they're going to get more attention. But if we're looking at the per pupil spending or the per pupil funding, um, I think it's a different story because, like we were saying in the last episode, um, the ratio of population of student population and how much money they actually get can it varies regardless of the total population.
Yeah, definitely. And something that I was thinking about was how I know that a lot of parents move based on the school for their kids, and I was thinking if a certain county had a lot more kids in it, would the like the county or the board just think that those schools deserve more funding also.
I don't know. I feel like, oh, sorry, I had a thought on that.
No, go ahead. Go ahead.
I think, I don't know, I feel like it depends on the county. Like, I think Maryland's in a unique position where a lot of times parents are moving depending on where they work, at least like considering we're right next to DC, we also have Annapolis and Baltimore, like three major cities that all have a lot of people working in them, but also living in the suburbs to where they commute. Like, at least for me, my parents commute to DC to work in DC, even though we live about 45 minutes outside of it. Like, with PG County bordering DC, I think it might be a lot of that situation where it's the suburbs of DC. So I think that just it's like a lot of people in that area. And I think what Sean was saying, that they're gonna get like more attention from the major, like the Maryland boards, like the Maryland general, like Board of Education is gonna pay more attention to them in that regard.
It's like more to manage. Like
Yeah.
physically, there's just more people to manage, more resources, numerically at least, not per pupil, need to be allocated to a larger number of students. And like it's kind of crazy how many more students there are in PG County compared to Kent County. And yes, of course, that will make them, I don't know, attract more attention overall, because they need to satisfy more people.
Yeah.
Yeah, definitely. Thank you guys for your answers.
Ryan,
and
did
I
you have
also,
something to say on that?
oh yeah. I don't
We'll
think
come
your
back to it.
audio is working. Yeah.
Ellie, you can keep going.
Okay.
Sorry, my headphones were muted. That's what it was.
Okay, cool.
My apologies. Essentially what I was just gonna say is pretty much that, like, also, yeah, we talk about like the more absolute attention devoted to these institutions, but also it may be like similar, like averaged out, like per pupil attention may be approximately like more even, as opposed to just because like more students and more attention devoted to the school as a whole would kind of, or at least in my opinion, would seem to equalize that out somewhat.
Yeah.
Yeah. Thank you, Ryan. You guys all bring up very good points. And next, I wanted to talk about the teacher salaries. So, one of the other counties that I wanted to talk about is Montgomery County, which seems to be way up there alongside Prince George's County in the funding that it receives per pupil. And it was a bit difficult to find like the average teacher salaries of many of these counties, but for reference, Prince George's average teacher salary, which I found on the Washington Area Boards of Education Guide, was an average of $73,900 in 2019. And then a Washington Post article discussed how, I quote, Montgomery County is $9,300 more than the average teacher salary pay in neighboring Prince George's County. And so that article was talking a lot about how teachers are moving districts for better pay. And I know that Prince George tried to close the pay gap by taxing counties with higher than average rates, but that move was rejected. So there was like a blueprint legislation as one of the actions being taken like statewide to fix this problem. But the blueprint legislation basically aims to guarantee a $60,000 start salary in every county to reduce the teacher pipeline and like give incentive to be a teacher. So I just wanted to know like your guys' thoughts about this issue and the actions that are currently being taken to help solve some of these problems.
I think that this is like one of the biggest issues of the school system, like not even just county, statewide, like nationally. Like I think COVID especially has expedited this problem and
Mhm.
like caused it to where like teachers are finding it so like it is so difficult for to switch from like online learning back to in person, back to online, and flip-flopping back and forth and expecting teachers to just pick that up, like to keep going without giving them any kind of like understanding, compensation, any like
Yeah.
of that kind of stuff. It's so draining to be a teacher. Like it takes so much effort and you're not getting paid enough to where that emotional and like physical effort is like paying off
Mhm.
because of like just how much teachers are forced to do. Like even though a lot of teachers are under contract for this many hours a week, this many hours a month, this many hours a year, they get paid depending on their contract. Like there's still so many hours off the job that teachers are
That they,
putting
yeah,
in that they aren't getting
absolutely.
paid for. And I think that that needs to be like money needs to be put aside for those extra hours. And it's because it's like if you actually want kids to get a quality education, it starts with the teachers. Like teachers are the
Yeah,
ones giving the kids the education. If the teacher is
exactly.
getting like um properly paid and properly like taken care of by the school system, they're not going to be able to give their kids like the best education that those kids
Mhm.
deserve. So I think it's like it's a very all-encompassing problem. Like if you it's like one thing leads to another and to another to another. If you don't fix the root problem of it all, I think that's what causes such an issue. And I
Mhm.
think that the $60,000 salary proposal for the future is good because at least you have like a space. But I still don't think 60,000 is enough in my opinion.
Yeah,
Also in
for
different
such a
counties.
for such a substantial role in
Yeah.
it in society,
Yeah.
if I were to say, it's like a massive. Being a teacher is unbelievably important to the world. Uh, having the responsibility of raising them, of informing the next generation on different subjects is so critical to the way uh, the world develops around us. And I absolutely agree with you in that teachers need to be paid more and given more benefits. Absolutely, our teachers should be favored.
Hmm.
Yeah,
Yeah,
'cause
I just think it's like such an important like thing. And I think that it's hard because I know people like in college now who are getting into like secondary and elementary education, and it's still like their first couple years of teaching is so hard because it's so easy to like it's so like not easy per se, but just very it's very like there's just such a easy way to get into that mentality of like I'm doing it for the kids, but at the same time it's like if you're not seeing the results you want to see, like not immediately, but if you're like waiting 4 or 5 years and you're still not getting that type of compensation that you think that you deserve because
Yeah.
you're literally a teacher, like you're not going to want to keep teaching. And I think that's why at least now I think with the pandemic and everything you're seeing a lot of teachers like quitting just because it's like
Hmm.
the school system isn't keeping up with what the teachers need and like deserve in order to keep their classroom running efficiently and like well enough to like keep students educated in a way that they need to be. Also, teachers are just treated so poorly like by the general public nowadays. I think that I don't want to be like politically, but I think that a lot has to do with like the mentality that's being pushed from like higher up people in politics. Like if they're not going to seem like they care about their teachers, the general public isn't either. So I
Yeah.
think that that causes such a problem because it's like teachers are just treated, there's so much misinformation about what teachers are teaching, and I think a lot of people want like a certain idea for what they want their kids to be like treated, like they want their kids to be given a good education, but they want to get the education to agree with what they think
But
should be the
exactly.
education, which causes so many problems for the teachers because teachers are just like, I'm doing my job, but they have
Hmm.
to deal with all these like parents who just can't like let the teachers do their job. And
Yeah.
it's like there's just so many things that make it not worth it to be a teacher anymore. And I think that the school system like really should step up more and like put in more effort to taking care of their teachers, or else people aren't going to want to keep doing it. And then we're going to be like,
Hmm.
I mean, you see teacher shortages even now. Like at my
Yeah.
school where I live,
Mhm.
we have plenty of teacher shortages. We'd have like people who didn't even have teaching degrees teaching us, and then our education would be bad. Like I think it's such a problem now, like trying to teach kids foundational understandings of math, English, sciences, history. Like if you're not going to be paying teachers what they deserve, they're not going to be teaching these kids these such important like ideas and aspects of their lives that
Mhm.
they need going forward.
Yeah, definitely. Like in general, teaching is, I agree, like it's a pretty thankless job. And also like, especially with all the like new requirements that are being pushed, like for all these like kind of metric-based things with like the No Child Left Behind and things like that, where like you're teaching like more towards the test, like with all the standardized testing increase that you have to like meet certain metrics on certain things. Like there's a lot more like content-driven like requirements by like regulations and things. So teaching is also a lot harder. Additionally, like I actually did TA with like my high school one of my classes in high school like a while at the end of senior year, and like
Hmm.
yeah, teaching is a lot more work behind the scenes than you'd expect with like grading, coming up with curriculum, coming up with exams, coming up with homework problems, like preparing slides, coming up with
Yeah.
like interesting activities to get kids engaged. Because yeah, you could also just like find like you could just use slides online or whatever, or like use the same slides year to year, just repeating the same information that's like very boring, very bland, very dry. Or like teachers who care will actually put in the work to make it
To
interesting
update
so
the
kids
content.
actually
Yeah,
learn. Yeah,
absolutely.
and that is not necessarily something that's so much like compensated or acknowledged.
Yeah, the incentive, it's hard to have the incentive to want to do that when you're not receiving that ample compensation for all the hard work that the teachers put in. Um, but if we want to kind of step back to what Jenna had mentioned earlier about teacher shortages, that is absolutely something that is going on today, especially with the rise of COVID, for a plethora of reasons, staff sickness, underlying health issues, not being able to actually come into school, needing to teach from online. For example, my school did hybrid learning for for a part of the COVID pandemic, and some teachers didn't come in, some teachers did, but overall there were less teachers in school being able to um, teach the students there for a variety of reasons. Um, and another effect that COVID has had on on teachers is the ability for teachers to acquire qualifications to teach certain classes. So one piece of information that I found while looking at this topic was that certain educators need to be certified in a certain field to be able to teach in that field. Less funding means less access or worse access to acquiring these new certifications to teach classes, and it's like a butterfly effect. You lose out on this key component, and you then can't teach this class, and then you're not making as much money, and then full circle back to teachers not making as much as they should be. And it really is an issue that needs to be addressed and brought to the forefront of the funding crisis in schools in Maryland and across the country.
Yeah, I totally agree, especially like with COVID. But even without that, like there has been a dramatic like decrease in people interested in teaching and education because as you guys mentioned, there is like no incentive, or like good incentive for that. And that's what the blueprint legislation is trying to do with the pay. Because there are like many teachers who still like shockingly get less than $60,000. So I think it's a good like baseline, but as you guys said, I also agree that it's definitely not enough. So thank you guys for that discussion. And we'll just take a moment now to recognize the advertisement of today's podcast. Have you heard of Student Entertainment Events, also known as C? C is a student-led organization which puts on many fun events for the student body at the University of Maryland. And some events that we have put on within the past school year are the fall series concerts with Duckworth and Bren Joy and the Jimmy O Yang Homecoming Comedy Show. Currently, we have a spring movie series where we screen a movie at Hoff Theater every week. This upcoming week, we will be showing Encanto on Tuesday and Wednesday at 8 p.m. in the Hoff Theater at Adele Stamp Student Union for free, so come out to watch with your friends. If you want to be the first to know about more upcoming C events, follow C on Instagram at C_UNI UMD. And back to our podcast discussing the personnel and funding within Maryland counties. I wanted to ask you guys about your individual experiences with this and any like personal stories that you'd like to share.
Yeah, absolutely. First of all, though, hats off to C. They do great work. Have some really
Thank
interesting
you.
events going on. Definitely go check them out. But in terms of my personal experience with regards to I guess the effect COVID has had on teachers and personnel, what I saw a lot was a lot of a mental effect on teachers, like especially as being in junior and senior year, you become more mature and are maybe more in tune with like, I don't know, having a stressful workload as opposed to you would be in like elementary and middle school. You may not understand the plight of teachers needing to struggle through teaching online and making all these assignments and having all of this work piled on top of you and stuff. And it was really became apparent in senior year when some teachers were teaching online. Some teachers didn't know how to, I don't know, maybe use certain programs to teach online. Um, there were like delays in class because like, oh, let me figure this out really quick, class. Or like I even had I had one of my Spanish teacher in senior year started crying on in a Zoom call. Um,
Oh no.
and it was like partially and it was because her son who had been needing to who was in like, I don't know, first or second grade, who had needed to be learning from like remotely online, had came to her and was like, Mom, I hate school, or I don't like learning. And it just made her really sad. And she canceled class. And it was really, I mean, I don't know, in the moment everyone was like, what just happened? Um, but thinking back on it, it really does speak to how much pressure is being put on teachers through all of this. Um, but there's that. And then one thing I want to say before I let other people speak on this is teachers needing to sometimes pay out of pocket for certain resources to teach their classes, especially with regards to COVID. Like one of my teachers had like 3 different camera setups in his class to teach us physics, and that being another strain on like the money available for teachers.
Yeah, I feel like for me, like I've had just similar experiences where teachers have had like a hard time like adjusting to Zoom. And I think since I was a senior, at least I was in a position where I didn't want to make it any more difficult for my teachers than it already was. So I think a lot of students, at least where I went to school and like in my class, were accommodating. But I know for other teachers, like I have neighbors and friends who are like elementary school teachers, and it's like such a hard adjustment and having such a hard time like getting students engaged and to stay engaged. And also like I think COVID has made it hard to where people are very involved now in like their students' lives, because now they're like in Zoom, you're like in the student's home, I guess, to some extent. And I think that makes it like kind of hard to separate home and job for students and teachers. Like school and home have now become synonymous with each other. And I think that's what makes it hard to like have a kind of good separate balance. And I think COVID has just made it really hard for students and teachers to get that kind of balance that they need in their lives.
Yeah, I think it's like with COVID and everything, like teachers have had to learn a whole new way to teach pretty much because it's very different teaching like a classroom of like kids that are like kind of not necessarily captive audience, but kind of are where they're like there and they're in person. You can kind of see them and monitor and like make sure they're paying attention or learning. Versus like trying to teach over Zoom where like people have all their cameras off and like you have no idea if they're actually learning or even paying attention, and like trying to capture their attention that way. And it's so much harder and so much different, and like using tools that people haven't used before, and like learning methods and techniques that they weren't taught and they have to kind of figure out as they go, but they're still expected to like know how to do it kind of right away. It's a lot of pressure with a lot of effort that's not necessarily acknowledged, which is just difficult to accept.
Yeah. thank you guys for sharing your experience and for that wonderful discussion. And thank you to our listeners once again for tuning into Classy Room.
Yes, absolutely.
This wraps up our third episode on this podcast. And stay tuned for the fourth and final episode of the Classy Room, where we will have a very special guest joining us. See you next time.
Bye, everyone.
Bye.
Thanks for listening.